Welcome back to my channel, Famous and Fabulous. The spotlight has never shaken Karoline Leavitt, until now, in a moment no one saw coming. She stood before the cameras, her voice, trembling eyes filled with tears. Something was different this time. The confident, outspoken figure we've come to know was suddenly vulnerable, her emotions raw, as she revealed a shocking announcement about her husband. Was it a heartbreak, a life-changing decision, or something even more unexpected as the room fell silent? Her words left everyone stunned, and now the truth is finally coming out. What is this truth? Karoline Leavitt's journey to the national stage wasn't exactly what you'd call typical. She didn't grow up in a political dynasty or have a straight path paved. She was a small town girl from New Hampshire, raised in a family that ran an ice cream shop and a used truck dealership. But even back then, there was something about Karoline. She had drive, ambition, and a voice she wasn't afraid to use. Fast forward to college, and that fire only grew stronger. While most students were trying to get through midterms, Karoline was making headlines, writing bold op-eds defending Trump's policies, and even starting her school's first broadcasting club. She wasn't just another student with opinions, she was making sure people heard them, and people did hear them. Big names took notice, leading her straight into conservative politics. A Fox News internship became a gig at the White House, where she worked directly under Kayleigh McEnany. From there, she became a powerhouse in political communications, serving as Lee Stevens' communications director in a world where young voices can struggle to break through. Karoline didn't just break through, she ensured noon could ignore her. But today, we're seeing a different side of her. The firm, confident Karoline is in tears, stepping in front of the cameras with a massive announcement about her husband, and trust me, no one saw this coming. Karoline's career wasn't without challenges. Just like an event she experienced after being newly elected, the press room was buzzing, and you could almost hear the unspoken skepticism hanging in the air. The youngest White House press secretary in history was about to take the podium, and expectations weren't exactly sky high. Some figured she'd play it safe, stick to the script and maybe stumble. Others assumed she'd be nervous, overwhelmed by the moment. But then she stepped up, and from the second she started speaking, it was clear she wasn't here to play by the old rule. Her first briefing was 47 minutes long. That's a marathon by opening day standards. But it wasn't just the length that got people talking. It was how she handled it. There was no tiptoeing around tough questions, no carefully worded non-answers. Instead, she met the press head-on, challenging their narratives, calling out bias, and clearly stating that she wasn't just another spokesperson. She was in control. Even NBC's Peter Alexander pushed her with tough questions, maybe expecting her to slip, but she didn't. She held her ground, answering with confidence, never once looking rattled. The skeptics had walked in expecting inexperience to show. Instead, they saw someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Moving on, this moment didn't happen by accident. She was preparing for it long before she ever stood at that podium. Back in New Hampshire at Sentinel College, she was already studying the game, learning how politics and media work together. That knowledge took her to the Trump White House, where she worked as an assistant press secretary before becoming the national press secretary for his 2024 campaign. She wasn't just along for the ride, she was learning, adapting, and proving herself in one of the most challenging political environments. But what set her apart wasn't just her confidence, it was her strategy. She saw the media landscape shifting. Traditional news outlets were losing their grip, while independent voices, podcasters, social media influencers, non-traditional journalists were reaching more people than ever. Instead of fighting that change, she leaned into it. She didn't waste time trying to win over legacy media. She took the administration's message straight to the platforms where people were listening. This wasn't just about a fresh face at the podium. It was about a complete shift in how the White House communicated with the public from day one. She clarified that she was redefining a role for years. White House press briefings had been dominated by the same legacy media outlets and reporters asking the same questions. But when Leavitt took over, that all changed. Suddenly, conservative influencers, podcast hosts, and independent digital voices had a seat at the table to the political elite. It was a shocking move to her. It was just common sense. Millions of Americans weren't tuning in to traditional news anymore, so why should the White House ignore them and whether people liked it or not? Her approach worked. Even White House Communications Director Stephen Chung called her first press conference the most successful ever. That one statement sent DC into a frenzy. The old model where mainstream media controlled the narrative was dead. Of course, not everyone was a fan. Leavitt was already a controversial pick. But the scrutiny wasn't just about her politics. Her personal life became just as much of a headline. She married Nicholas Rio, a 59-year-old real estate mogul, 32 years. Her senior people had opinions, a lot of them. Was it love? Was it a strategy? Some saw it as a scandal, others couldn't care less. Either way, the noise didn't faze her. She had bigger things to worry about. And then the world flipped upside down. July 13th, 2024, a Trump rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. The energy was electric. Then gunshots, chaos, erupted. A bullet struck. Donald Trump, Secret Service agent, swarmed supporters, screamed he was bleeding, but still standing. The moment didn't just shake the country, it changed everything for Leavitt. It hit on a completely different level. She wasn't in the crowd that day. She wasn't even in Washington. She was at home rocking her newborn son, just 3 days old. She had turned on the rally, like it was just another campaign event. Then suddenly, she was watching history unfold in real time, unable to do anything but sit there frozen. The footage played on an endless loop. Its weight hit her like a freight train. She was a new mum cradling this tiny, fragile life, but she was also a political fighter, and deep down she knew this wasn't just about Trump, it was about the future. So she made a decision, one that most new mums wouldn't even consider. She turned to her husband and said, "I'm going back 4 days, that's all." She gave herself 4 days after giving birth. She was back on screen in the fight. The public was stunned. How could she do it? Why would she? Her body was still healing. Her baby was barely a week old. But for Leavitt, the answer was simple. The president nearly lost his life fighting for this country. She later said, "The least I could do was get back to work." Some called it loyalty. Some called it madness. But to her, it was just doing what had to be done. Trump's survival wasn't just another wild political moment to her, it was a statement. It proved that resilience, determination, and sheer stubbornness could keep you standing even when the world tried to knock you down. If he could take a bullet and keep going, what excuse did she have to quit? But let's be honest, jumping back into politics while juggling a newborn wasn't a walk in the park. 1 minute she was facing off against reporters at the White House podium. The next she wondered if her baby even remembered what she looked like leaving her child every day. Heartbreaking. It does break your heart, she admitted. But did she slow down? Not a chance. That just wasn't in her nature. And honestly, she had a secret weapon. Her husband, Nicholas Rio. The guy wasn't one for the spotlight, but behind the scenes, she was the glue holding everything together while she tackled the chaos of Washington. He was at home, making sure their son was fed, cared for, and hopefully not already plotting his escape from the crib. Lucky for her, his business job allowed him to step up in ways most people never saw. The assassination attempt had rattled the country, but for her, it was a gut check. It reminded her why she chose this path, why she sacrificed things most people took for granted, and why stepping away just wasn't an option. So, when she stood in front of the press just days after one of the most terrifying moments in modern politics, she wasn't just holding it together, she was doubling down. But Nguyen realized something more personal would come to light beneath her calm and collected exterior. She wasn't just balancing motherhood and politics. She was about to drop a bombshell about her husband. To have everyone talking now in the world of politics, every relationship gets analyzed like it's a detective case, and her marriage to Nicholas Rio, it had people raising eyebrows. But unlike the usual power couple pairings you see in DC, theirs wasn't based on career moves or political alliances. They met at a political event, one of those stuffy, high-energy gatherings where everyone shakes hands, makes power moves, and pretend they're not exhausted. She was already on the rise, totally in her element. Meanwhile, Rio, a real estate mogul with more money than most people could dream of, had zero interest in playing the political game. The guy barely even spoke to the press. let alone cared about, making headlines. And yet when a mutual friend introduced them, something just clicked on paper. They made no sense. She was young, ambitious, and thrived on public attention. He was 32 years older, allergic to social media, and couldn't have cared less about the latest Twitter drama. He had none in a world where people practically measure success by Instagram followers. No Twitter LinkedIner. Even a Facebook page for old time's sake for someone with his level of influence that was unheard of. But where others saw a mismatch, they saw balance. She commanded rooms and made waves. He was the quiet strategist, excellent, watching from the sidelines. Their relationship wasn't just unconventional, it was the kind that made people talk. Some didn't get it, some loved it, but for them, it just worked. People couldn't stop talking about it. The age gap wasn't just a passing comment. It became the conversation. Social media exploded with opinions, and not the subtle kind. Some called it opportunistic, others doubted. It was real whenever she posted a picture with Rio. The comment section became free. Is that your dad? One person mocked another, went straight for the jugular. Your husband could be your grandfather, and yet you judge everyone else, but she wasn't having it. No long-winded defenses, no dramatic clapbacks, just quiet, unshakable confidence. He's my #1 fan. The best dad and the best man I've ever met, she wrote. If people thought they could embarrass her into silence, they had no idea who they were dealing with while the internet dissected their every move. She and Rio were busy living their lives privately, intentionally, and without the need for an audience. No over-the-top displays, no magazine spreads, just two people who knew exactly what they had. Even their engagement followed. That same rhythm, Christmas Day 2023, in their home. Not theatrics, he asked, she answered. And that was that. The next day, she shared one photo, Rio on one knee, a diamond reflecting the winter light. The best Christmas of my life. I get to marry the man of my dreams. No spectacle, no performative emotion. Just genuine joy. Their wedding was the same. While most political figures opt for extravagant headline-grabbing ceremonies, theirs was the opposite, entirely out of the public eye. No press, no exclusives, no mysterious, anonymous sources leaking details. She didn't even post a wedding announcement. She just updated her bio with one word. Wife needed to say, the marriage didn't slow them down. It kicked things into high gear. Did she step into one of the most demanding jobs in politics? In Rio, he kept running his real estate empire. Like he always had, no interviews, attention-seeking moments, or sudden memoir release, titled My Life as a Political Spouse. He stayed exactly where he wanted to be, out of sight. But that didn't mean his presence wasn't felt. When she shocked everyone by returning to work just 4 days after giving birth, people had questions. How is that even possible? Simple Rio, while she faced the press, he was at home ensuring their newborn son had everything he needed. She always called him her greatest supporter, the man who gave everything and asked for nothing but what. Nobody realized Washo much. He had sacrificed to his role. It wasn't just that of the supportive husband standing in the background, nodding along. Like a well-dressed extra, it was something much bigger. And when she finally broke down and revealed the truth about him, people finally understood. Nicholas Rio had been carrying something no one saw coming. He was never supposed to be in the spotlight. While she made history as the youngest White House press secretary, Rio stayed behind the scenes where he was most comfortable. People assumed he was another wealthy businessman who had made all the right moves. But his story, it wasn't what anyone expected. Before the success, before the millions, before the political influence, Rio had nothing at 18. While most kids were stressing over college applications, Rio was homeless. He had no backup plan, safety net, or reassuring "You can always come home" speech from his parents. He was on his own. And while most people in that position would be focused on survival, Rio saw an opportunity. Failure wasn't an option. He worked relentlessly, with no connections and barely any money, saving every dollar he could. By the early 2000s, he noticed run-down properties in Hampton Beach, New Hampshire. The places most people wouldn't look twice at to everyone else. They were a lost cause to Rio. They were a gold mine. He started small, buying the properties. Nobody wanted, fixing them up and turning them into highly sought-after rentals. Every cent he made went straight back into his business. By 2005, he had built something real. 15 buildings, 70 rental units, and a reputation as someone who saw value where others didn't. Then his empire expanded. His company, Rio Enterprises, LLCIs, spread across New England. He used the same strategy: find forgotten places, turn them into something valuable, and never overextend. By the time people learned his name, he was already a multimillionaire. But here's the part: nobody expected his properties weren't just about making money, they became something more. A gathering place, a meeting ground, a quiet but powerful force in conservative circles. While others were making noise, he was making moves, and yet through all of it, he never stepped into the limelight, never chased recognition, never felt the need to prove anything, because the most influential people, they're never the ones making the most noise. They're the ones pulling the strings without anyone realizing it. Most men in his position would be flashing their wealth, making sure the world knew their name, not Nicholas Rio, while other real estate mogul gave TED Talks about the hustle and posing next to their private jets. Rio was quietly moving pieces behind the scenes. He wasn't interested in clout. He was interested in results, and somehow that made him even more intriguing. Take one of his properties, for example. It wasn't just another real estate investment. It became a hub for conservative women, hosting Women for Trump gatherings that had a profound impact. But Rio wasn't just some deep-pocketed donor writing checks from the comfort of his office. He was a strategist, making sure his success meant something. And unlike the billionaires who couldn't resist name-dropping their political connections, Rio played it differently. No interviews, no magazine covers, no carefully curated Instagram posts. The man barely existed online. It was almost impressive. And for a while, Hess stayed in the background, until his marriage to Karoline Leavitt pulled him straight into the spotlight, not by choice. Of course, social media had a field day with their age. The comments where ruthless people speculated, criticized, and insisted it had to be transactional. But here's what they didn't get. Their marriage wasn't built on optics. It was built on shared values, mutual respect, and an understanding that in their world, stability at home was non-negotiable. So while Karoline took on one of the most high-pressure political jobs, Rio ensured their home life was just that, home. And when their son, Nicholas Robert, was born, he didn't hesitate. He stepped back from his empire not because he had to, but because he wanted to, for a man who had built everything from nothing. Shifting priorities wasn't some grand sacrifice. It was just what you do when you're Allen. But of course, no matter how much Rio tried to avoid attention, the truth had a way of catching up with him. And when Karoline finally let the world in on what he had done, it was enough to leave even the most seasoned political insiders stunned for weeks. People asked the same question: how is she doing this? How was she juggling an all-consuming career, a newborn, and the relentless pressure of public life without completely falling apart? She had returned to work just 4 days after giving birth, and while some called it inspiring, others questioned how she was managing it at all. And then one day, it all cracked, standing in front of a room full of reporters, composed, professional. Every bit. The press secretary, Karoline, suddenly faltered. She took a deep breath, steadied herself, and then in a moment, noon saw coming. So she let the mask slip. I've been asked many times how I've managed to balance this job, being a new mom, and everything that comes with it. He said, her voice uncharacteristically raw. The truth is, I couldn't have done any of this without my husband. And just like that, the man who had spent years in the shadows became impossible to ignore. For all the speculation about their relationship, no one had understood the whole story. Nicholas Rio wasn't just a successful businessman or a quiet political force. He yured their family didn't fall apart under the weight of her career at that moment. Karoline clarified just how much he had sacrificed long before their son was even born. Rio had made a choice. No headlines captured it, and no political strategists advised it. He did what needed to be done. He stepped back, shifted his entire schedule, and ensured Their family didn't miss a beat. When Karoline returned to work, when I told Nicholas I wanted to return to work as soon as possible, he didn't hesitate. She admitted. He just said, "We'll figure it out." And he did. She talked about the guilt, the heartbreak of leaving her son every day, and how there were moments when it felt unbearable, and every single time Rio was there, not with empty reassurances or some vague "you got this" pep talk, but with action, knowing that Nicholas is with his father, knowing that he is there every step of the way. That's what makes this possible for me. And just like that, the narrative changed. Nicholas Rio wasn't just a wealthy businessman, or the elusive husband in the background. He was the reason the whole operation worked. He had built an empire, sure, but his most significant investment, the one thing that truly set him apart, it was what he had been quietly giving every single day without expecting anything in return. Then came the press conference that changed everything. Leavitt, known for her composure, teared up as she admitted just how much her husband had given up for their family. At that moment, the usual political script was thrown out the window. This wasn't about competition or one person's career overshadowing the other. It was about partnership, about truly having each other's backs. The media, of course, had a field day. Was she setting an impossible standard for working mums? Or was she proving that women in power don't have to choose between ambition and family in a world where power often comes at a cost? Leavitt and Rio proved that real success is about who stands beside you, and maybe, just maybe, their story will inspire others to rethink what true partnership looks like.